I get to moderate this panel. I'm really excited to do that. It's actually kind of a thrilling honor to have been asked to do this with you all. My name is Sam Rutledge. I'm on the board of directors and one of the liaisons to the Country Fair's Diversity Committee. And I'm going to start by just introducing our panelists. To begin, Iana Matthews-Harris is a performance artist, an activist, a mother, and a farmer from Eugene, Oregon. Iana's been attending the Oregon Country Fair since she was in her mother's womb. Iana has worked with social justice groups and nonprofits for most of her life, including the Committee for Countering Military Recruitment, the Growers Market Food Cooperative, the Youth in Action. She was a co-manager of the Wayne Morris Youth Program and worked with Lane County as the coordinator of the Positive Youth Development Initiative. She's been trained as a facilitator with the Power of Hope and utilizes their philosophy of youth empowerment through cultural appreciation, participation, and acceptance. Iana founded Inspire through the spoken word program at Oregon Country Fair with her partner Ishi, and for 15 years, it's been one of the only outlets for hip hop and multicultural youth empowerment during the event, and she's been part of the Oregon Country Fair Diversity Committee for the past year. John Silvermoon has worked as a professional archaeologist, labor organizer, nonprofit professional, and currently is a nonprofit consultant and the leader of a blues band, the Vipers, featuring Deb Cleveland. And as an aside, if you have a chance to check them out, definitely do, they're hot. John's commitment to peace and social and environmental justice has its roots in the 1960s when he was a poll watcher in Mississippi and an anti-war activist. Since moving to Eugene, John's been a candidate for public office, has served on several city and county committees and commissions, and has worked on numerous political campaigns. He was the chief petitioner for Eugene's successful historic street charter amendment initiative and volunteered with several nonprofits. The Oregon Country Fair has been part of John's life since 1974, and he has served in various roles, including as co-coordinator of Community Village, co-coordinator of Dog Control Crew, and a member of the board of directors and on numerous board committees. In the early 1980s, he was instrumental in finding the archaeological sites which resulted in the state of Oregon moving Highway 126 from its planned route through the center of the fair to its current location along the south side of the fair's property. As a board member, John sponsored the 2014 motion which created the task force, which was a precursor to the current diversity committee. John serves on the diversity and archaeology committees. Brooks McLean, who uses he and they pronouns, the queer activist and digital storyteller who serves on the board of directors for the Eugene Springfield Pride Festival. A member of the Community Village's Coordinating Council, Brooks's work is focused on queer liberation and working to make the world more equitable and inclusive for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, and queer individuals and communities. Britania Pousson-nicastro, did I get your name right, Britania? Good. Who uses she and they pronouns, is a transformative justice nerd, abolitionist, holistic singing coach, and counselor, and is honored to have a hand and heart in the movements to make us free. She was originally welcomed into FAIR in 2013 by the Recycling Crew, where she co-founded and leads the Care Bears, a crew mental health and advocacy group, as well as directs education and outreach efforts towards a waste-free fair. Britania is a crisis worker at Whitebird and a member of the Diversity Committee. Her home is on unceded Kumeyaay territory, which is also known as San Diego, where her activism spans Chicano, BIPOC, and queer community building, street medic services, sex work, humanitarian clowning, community singing, youth mentorship, advocating for survivors of sexual violence. Gratitude to her teachers at Holistic Resistance, at Be the Change Consulting, and Melanie Demore, who have shaped and supported her mission to fuel the intentions of underserved communities through art, relationship, and the daily practice of abolitionism. So that's a fantastic panel, which with just an enormous amount of experience in this area, and I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say in response to some questions. The way this panel will go, I'm going to start by giving a little bit of history on the Diversity Committee, not very much, but just enough to get a sense of kind of where we've been and where we're at. And then we've got some questions that we'll just open up to the panel, and I'll direct the questions to one of you all. But then once you've given an answer, we can open up for discussion and just kind of be informal like the fair, because it is the fair. So the history of the Diversity Committee, I dug into old minutes to get some dates, and I will say it's worth doing, going back and looking at some of these discussions that were had going back to 2005, because you can really see in those discussions, in some ways, how our thinking as an organization has developed and changed, and some of the work we've done and the fruits of some of that work. And in other ways, how some of the discussions we were having in 2005 are really similar to the ones we're having today. So just my little pitch for going back and doing that, that research and reading those old minutes. So in 2005, the fair embarked on a collaborative visioning process that intentionally included a range of diverse perspectives, including those of BIPOC folks and members of what the documents from that time refer to as the GLBT community. Not a phrase I had seen in print or used before, but I'm assuming it means the same as LGBT. This process culminated with a list of goals that was approved by the board back in April of 2008. And the first of those goals is the Oregon Country Fair shall increase the diversity of all aspects of the Oregon Country Fair community. This goal was accompanied by 5 proposed action steps, some of which we're still working on today. In 2014, the Diversity Task Force was formed, citing a lack of progress on Vision Goal 1 as one of the reasons that the task force was needed. The task force was charged with 4 tasks: to develop a long-range plan with measurable objectives to address issues of racism, classism, and other forms of discrimination, to advise the board of directors on issues as the long-range plan is being developed, to research available data on successful diversity trainings for staff and volunteers, and to develop a budget that will adequately fund that long-range plan, and to include members of the Country Fair family who are not, and these are the words that were in the motion at the time, who are not mainstream in its research. And then it defines mainstream as white, Western, middle class, heterosexual, able-bodied, and above the poverty level. So including people who don't fall into that. Since its founding, the Diversity Task Force has arranged a number of learning opportunities, almost annually, if not more than annually, with distinguished trainers and those learning opportunities have been available to leaders and members in the Country Fair, and provided much needed perspective to the board and management on issues we faced. In 2009, as our recognition of the complex and ongoing nature of equity work grew, the board redesignated the Diversity Task Force into a standing committee. And so that brings us to some of the questions that are on the table. And I'm going to direct the first one to Brooks. So Brooks, what are some of the things that people might not be aware of around doing the work of diversity, doing the work of the Diversity Committee, I'm sorry, in a white-led organization?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And thank you for that great bit of history there too. I think one of the kind of primary things I've run into is that resistance can come from unexpected places to this work, especially in liberal organizations. So I grew up in Alabama, and you kind of see racism out front, and it's very powerful and in your face. It's institutionalized and like very obviously so. In a place like the Oregon Country Fair, you know, no one's a racist, right? We've all solved that problem already 50 years ago. We had our realization and we've moved on from that. And so there's this saying, you know, it was a moment, not a movement. And I think for a lot of activists in the 60s that had that moment and have not, you know, kind of persisted with that, a lot of the Black people who were involved then never stopped. I mean, that moment's never over. It's been going on for 50 years. And I know and a lot of the gay rights and trans rights work that I do, you know, AIDS hadn't even started then. It came up later. And so kind of the system trying to literally kill us. And then, you know, feeling like a lot of liberals abandoned the gay, the LGBTQ community during that time. And so when you talk to a white liberal who doesn't like to think of themselves as a racist, and when I say racist, I don't mean using the N-word against a Black person. I mean the kind of institutionalized like way that we grew up and the way that we interact with the world is racist because our society is racist, right? And if you saw a little bit of what Robin was talking about before, with the way colonization worked, with the way that settler colonialism especially worked, and that we still are settler colonialists today, especially white people, that never went away. And so until that goes away, we're all part of a racist structure. And so there's a really strong resistance to that, especially among white liberals, about thinking of themselves as acting in racist ways or acting in, white supremacist ways, and not wanting to acknowledge that because it feels internally like you're acknowledging that you're a bad person. And it's not about being a good or a bad person. It's about how what we do in the world radiates out and affects others. And a lot of that's unintentional, and it's coming from oftentimes from a place of wanting to help people even. And, the helping is harming sometimes. And so to kind of combat that, it's really important to listen more than we talk. And, that's something I work on constantly. It's important to, whenever, as a white guy, and I was assigned male at birth, so I use he and they pronouns both. We're often told to speak up, right, and take control of conversations and drive meetings, and we get a lot of space to do that. And it comes natural. And so when we're not doing that, it feels uncomfortable. And uncomfortable does not mean that it's bad, right? So just sit with that and figure out where the source of that comes from, because white supremacy is not only afflicting, marginalized people, it's also afflicting mainstream people or people who are not from marginalized identities. We're all dealing with it. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you're resisting a group of Black women are all saying the same thing, for instance, let's say, and you're sure you're right, and you're also not a racist, just think about that. Step outside yourself and your own perspective for a second, and maybe try to listen a little bit. And don't try to be a good white person. It's not about being good. It's not about being right. It's about dismantling this structure that we're all existing in. Another kind of something you might not expect is how emotionally exhausting it is. And so if you aren't from one of these identities, and you're talking about these things oftentimes theoretically, and maybe someone who has bumped up against racism or homophobia or transphobia, or you have a kid or you have a partner, and so you get a window into that. But if you don't actually kind of live your life with one of these identities, it's really hard to understand how to your soul some of these things can cut you whenever you bump up against these resistances, and how you're working for yourself, but you're working for everyone, and people who insist that your allies are harming you and insisting that they're not harming you. And so that takes a toll, especially if you are going to stick with this work and not have your own moment and then move on. And so self-care is extremely important. I do yoga every day. I do a ton of gardening. I love to hike. I mean, in self-care or not, I drink my worries away at night. Like it's really a matter of finding something that can give you energy that's outside of this and even outside of other people oftentimes, so that you can, fortify yourself to deal with some of these things. That was kind of my two things I think are really maybe people don't think about, because it's hard to not be personal about a thing that's your identity.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Do any of the other panelists want to jump in and add something, or we can go on to the next question as well? But go ahead, Iana.
I think it's really important to think about how, like in speaking on what Brooks was saying about how it's very hard to admit to racism and admit that we do have a problem, especially as a hippie counterculture revolutionary organization, when we are theoretically trying to be the antithesis of all of that oppression in our culture. One thing that helps, me, myself, and many of people in the BIPOC community will say too, we have our own internalized racism. Nobody can hide from it. So if the brown folks have it, the queer folks have it, then you have it too, if you're cis and white. But one thing that can help to really kind of visualize that is this is a larger picture than all of us. This is a massive machine. This is hundreds of years of oppression. This is, as we know, countless wars and countless movements of social justice. that is way bigger than any of us can hold. We don't own all of the media rights. We don't have control over what is broadcast on YouTube, right? So if you can take on that little piece and recognize, okay, this is a massive moving object or force or machine that I happen to be caught up in, that means I constantly do have to check myself on what ways I'm embodying that machine and what ways I'm, you know, being the flowers or trees or whatever is the opposite of a machine that is theoretically thriving and, you know, creating that change. So if you recognize it really is, it is within us, but it's also outside of us, and it's a really big picture, then you don't have to, you know, stress too much on taking a little bit of control and copying to what you are creating and what you are embodying that could be racist or could be somewhat homophobic or, you know, classist or whatever those isms are that do come up in all of us.
Definitely. We need to make safe spaces for people to call each other in to conversation, right? And not have that create those spirals of guilt that like shut things down. Britania.
Yeah, thanks for this question. And I also just wanted to speak to my own experience that Brooks started sharing around how, I believe, soul crushing was the term he used. It can be to experience institutional barriers when we're trying to just start at the bare minimum of basic rights within an organization, basic respect, basic protection, and just resolution. And for me, it's been this real, especially over the last couple of years, this real veil lifting, because I have been indoctrinated into white supremacy, hippie culture, just as much as the next person, in seeing it as a place that was safe, seeing it as a place where I could grow and be seen as equal and treated equitably. And so as I've reconciled more about both my whiteness and my POC-ness and that around me in the environments I find myself in at OCF and other white-led organizations, it has been so soul-crushing. It is so hard. It is so much emotional labor to see something that I thought, and people that I thought as safer spaces, actually not. And that actually increases as I take on more leadership roles. It's not just like the cultural movement. It's like the more I step up and the more comfortable I become talking about race and the more comfortable I become, well, yeah, I guess just speaking up. Like there's so much talk around how speaking up is like a good thing. Like we want your voice, like raise your voice. And that actually puts us in danger, puts marginalized people in danger. If not, you know, like literal physical danger, but just like how hard it is to spend that emotional labor and how emotionally laborious it is to put ourselves in those positions. And, you know, speaking up often leads to things maybe getting worse or stalling or us needing to take a break and like not do anything for a while and take away from our other life duties.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing about your own experience as well, because I think that that's really powerful, and maybe more helpful even to folks who are trying to understand this, you know, than the sort of big picture intellectual end of things. So thank you for that, because I know it's a vulnerable thing. Are we ready to move on to the next question? The next one goes to John. What are some of the things, some of the issues and projects that the Diversity Committee has been working on, and what's coming up on the horizon? What's next for the Diversity Committee at FAIR?
Well, I think one of the first things the people got involved with was the issue of cultural appropriation. You have a question about that later, so I won't get into that in detail right now. And over the last couple of years, I think with the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd, trying to get the FAIR to be more than just performative in its response to that. So we can, you know, helping to put out a nice statement of solidarity, but where's the action that backs that up? And a lot of that, I think the committee has taken a lead on trying to help the fair look at itself and evaluate itself, and look at and take a serious a serious introspection about who we are, what we've been doing, and how BIPOC folks, LGBTQ plus folks have been, how they experience the fair has been different than a lot of us, the white folks, the white hippies who established this thing. I think that we're just ending a process of working with a group of consultants who have come up with a series of recommendations for us, some of which have been things we've already been working on. For instance, the diversity census. One of the things we wanted to do is to figure out, you know, I mean, the goal is to increase the diversity at the fair. Well, it'd be nice to have something more than anecdotal about how diverse are we currently, you know, and where are we doing well and where are we not doing well. So that's the diversity census. We've been working with the how the fair can better respond to incidents that occur, both against individuals and groups, and the whole re-envisioning the grievance process. We've been working, giving feedback to the folks who have been redoing the grievance process to try to make it more accessible and culturally relevant to, you know, to various folks. I think one of the big things that's on the horizon is this question of education versus accountability. That a lot of folks feel like what they want is give us an educational program and we'll take it and everything will be fine. But holding folks in positions of authority, holding them accountable, I think is also going to be very important. And whether or not, and this is partly from my perspective here, whether we can afford to take the time to have someone who is in a position of authority to be educated, or whether we need to have them step aside so that we can place people into those positions who already have the tools and are ready to work on this transformative journey that we're taking to become more welcoming and diverse and inclusive. That's a discussion that we are just starting to have, I think. And it's going to be a difficult one because it's going to be very challenging to some folks who don't see themselves as obstacles. I think how to get those recommendations implemented and taken seriously, I think it's going to be a real challenge. And whether or not this transformative journey is something that is one of the things we do or something we do with everything that we do is going to be a challenge. Because one of the things people have come up already is, well, we don't have the money to hire DEI staff. Well, that's taking it as, well, this work is one of the things we do. If you take it as this is work that is inclusive of everything we do, then you find a way to make that happen. So those are some of the stuff we're doing and the challenges we're facing.
Thank you, John. Do other panelists want to chime in on this question? I'm seeing no. I think Brooks, go ahead. Or
Britania first.
Britania first.
Oh yeah. That was great, John. And as you can hear, we have so many huge projects going. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this point of our goal being to increase diversity at FAIR. And there is some nuance to that, because as a brown person, like, I would love to have more brown people on my crew, more Black and brown people serving food, selling their crafts, just being around in that environment. And at the same time, I really like to look at, before I look at increasing diversity in a space, I like to think of making it safer for diverse people to want to be in that space, and letting them come to us, kind of thing. Because as we stand now, we are not a safer space for the marginalized people we already have.
That is so important. Thank you for drawing that out, Britania.
And that really informs and kind of what we were talking about earlier with the emotional toll it takes on marginalized people to be the people carrying this bucket. Really are kind of the two buttressing pillars underneath needing to pay people to do this work year round, and to coordinate this work, and to have each other as sounding boards. And, I volunteered like all the other volunteers, and, it's a lot of fun to go volunteer to set up a stage, and it's a lot of fun to work a soundboard. It's a lot of fun to camp with your friends in the woods and clear paths. It's not necessarily a lot of fun to work to dismantle racism whenever you're met at resistance every step of the way. And so, especially when it's not, none of us get, passes, we don't get camping, there's no like benefit. And so when you're asking, especially Black and brown people, Indigenous people, to stand up and take abuse, to dismantle the things that are oppressing them, we can compensate folks a little bit for that, and really build it into our structure so that it is something we're doing across the fair. Because it's never, I'm in the community village, and I like to say, we're all on the diversity committee in the village. It's not a committee's work. It's all of our work individually and collectively in every crew and every part of our organization. And so we need to value that, and one way to show that we value that is to spend money in that area. So we'll be working on that a lot.
Yeah, I'd like to add one little thing here. One of the big challenges we have is the fair has been successful in many ways. We're 50 years old. A lot of things that started 50 years ago are no longer around. The way we've been doing things in many ways has worked for people who have been doing them. But the challenge is that the way we've been doing things is not going to work if we are serious about becoming more welcoming and safe and inclusive place. And a lot of the comfort of people of, well, this is the way we've always done it and it's worked, that's going to be real challenging for a lot of people to address. And bringing people along is going to be important to do that. So
that also is just a really important point. The fair is a place where people have a lot of traditions that are really important to them, right? And that people do year after year, and so much so that even when we're not allowed to do a fair in person, we do it here in the clouds, because those traditions are that important to us. So how do we change and not lose what's essential, but lose maybe what's not helping us, lose those things that are hurting us and that are hurting our community?
Sam, I just have a correction I'd like to make real quick. Yeah. I realized I said something really problematic. I was talking about wanting to see Black and brown people selling crafts and serving food, and that was like totally like not what I meant. I mean, like leading, as friends, performers, like just all around fair. So I'm sorry for the impact of that might have had on anybody.
For what it's worth, I definitely heard your words to mean participating in our community in a meaningful way. And so, but thank you. Jana, do you want to chime in on this question, or?
The thing I have to chime in on may not be cute. But what I think about the most in, hearing you guys talk about this, and I am one of the newer members of Diversity Committee. I kind of just got semi-talked into it by participating last year and was like, oh, well, I should, do this because it's aligned with many of my goals of what I've been trying to do with Inspire and just participating at FAIR as a young person of color growing up there. But what I've noticed, the non-cute part, is that the opposition that I have noticed in the past year to these motions we've put place, or to any of the, even just the consultants coming in and giving recommendations, much less their recommendations as it is, there seems to be a pattern of the people that are strongly opposed and strongly vocal about it. And this is maybe a blanket statement, and I, apologize in advance. However, I believe in free speech. It tends to be older, white, heterosexual males. And that doesn't mean that they're the only people that aren't into what we're doing. And that doesn't even mean they're not into what we're doing. However, there have been incredibly harmful and hurtful vocalizations from that particular subset of our community towards this work. And that is a heart-wrenching thing, in that I would like to hope that everyone's intention that does come to FAIR is what we've all been talking about, is this community, this amazing potential that we have. And yet, when you read some of the emails that we've gotten, and when you see some of the participants that have taken the time to come to board meetings to essentially talk trash about members of the diversity committee and of the work that is being done, and it is mind-explodingly frustrating to talk about, as Britania said, about the labor, emotional toll and labor on people of color. We have professionals on the diversity committee that put tons of hours into this when they get paid in the normal world for the same kind of work. And not only are they not getting compensated to do this labor, but they're literally being met with opposition. And that, to me, is what I see as the most trying issue that we have, because there are really amazing things on the forefront. The fact that we got the consultants, the fact that they do have some recommendations, and we can begin to look at ways that we really can change this organization for the better and really become inclusive and fully embody that revolutionary dream that we are. When I see that there is that level of opposition that just feels very much 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so if there's any way that maybe more people that do support this type of work can continue to speak out and continue to participate, and if there's some way to bridge the gap between that particular subset of the community, like I said, and that we understand with privilege comes the power to speak your mind all the time. And maybe it can be that that particular group of, elder white males happen to feel that they are allowed to speak more. It could be as simple as that. However, it's harmful and it's degrading to what it is we're doing. So it's not, I don't want to overly focus on conflict, but that has been something that I've just observed in the past year that needs to change in order for us to come together and work together. Like, the diversity committee is not some big bad guy coming to destroy the fair. That just isn't what's happening. What's happening is a lot of volunteers coming together to try to create something that we are theoretically creating, but that has not been the experience of many queer folks, many people of color. So that's my little piece. And I don't want to point fingers, but there's some facts that definitely show up, and it's really important for all voices to be heard. And it's also important to find ways that we can really create this tangible change and make all parties comfortable, regardless of, your privilege or lack thereof.
I so appreciate you drawing that theme out, and it really actually is a perfect segue into the next question. Before we jump into it, I want to throw out 2 things. First of all, if you are watching this panel on the Oregon Country Fair website, you can throw a question in the chat. If you're here in the Zoom, feel free to throw a question into the Zoom chat and we'll do the best we can. From the stream, Stallion222 says, "Thank you, Diversity Committee, heart." So you're welcome, Stallion222. Britania, you get the next question. We've heard from some at the fair that Oregon Country Fair does not need this work and that there isn't a problem around these issues. In essence, we've already figured out and moved beyond this. How would you encourage Fair family that is ready and doing this work to engage with these folks? And how can we assist the understanding of those people who don't see the barriers to country fair being welcoming and inclusive to people from marginalized backgrounds and identities?
Yeah, this brings up a lot. The first thing it brings up is around this theme I keep coming back to of moving at the speed of relationship. So much of what we do at fair is, especially once we get to pre-fair, is just like, let's get on with it. Let's do this. And I mean, even on the off season, I'm thinking even our diversity committee meetings, it's like we have so much work to do, and it's really understandable, that urgency. And at the same time, if we really want to reach the people who have power, and the white people in particular, who have the power to really like champion these efforts, I think there's just a lot of slowing down we have to do, not necessarily to reach these people that have this notion that you said in the question, but also to care for each other as we're putting that labor in, because we really can't do it unless we have relationships with each other as a change-making collective, and have spaces to care for each other. And I mean, I just think strong leadership who is really behind us is so key in this, because if we start to have policies and structures and processes that create an environment where folks who aren't willing to at least take the first step, at least take baby steps every day, where it makes an environment where those kind of folks don't want to be there. You know, I don't want to sound exclusive and like some people should leave, but I mean, in essence, like if we're giving you the tools and the space to take those baby steps and you're not willing to do that, then I don't think this should be the place for that, for those folks. We're not for everybody. Anti-racism, not everybody's ready for it right now. And so FAIR needs to become an anti-racist organization at the core and leadership level. And I mean, how that happens, I mean, that I don't know yet, but hopefully we're getting there.
So we've got a response in the chat from an anonymous chatter. The public perception of the fair is that the fair family is very insular and does not create opportunities for new members to join as insiders. Instead, they join hands and push the punters out at the end of the scheduled day before continuing to celebrate fair into the night. You've got to know somebody in order to get inducted into the crew, who is welcomed to participate in what so many say is the full experience. Everybody else is there to pay money to the vendors and then get out. And I think this theme like really is relevant to what you're talking about, Britania. And I wonder if you or if any of the other panelists want to address that as part of this question.
Yeah, that is so important. And that is a barrier we've talked a lot about, of how hard it is for new people to come in, how hard it is to expand the number of passes a certain crew has. And because it's just kind of like this cyclical thing, because there are so few people of color at FAIR now. And you know, it is about the people you're closest to, bringing people in. And I mean, I hear a lot in the diversity committee from the people of color there and the marginalized people there, and just in myself, like, I don't know that I would be comfortable bringing in my Black and brown marginalized friends, like because of all the stories I've heard of people being targeted and not feeling welcome. Or even like my immigrant friends or people who don't speak English as a first language. I just don't know that it would be a very fun experience for them. There actually have been a couple times where I've brought people onto my crew, and I don't know that in those particular cases it wasn't welcoming. I'd have to think more about that, but I can say that one thing that tends to happen is there's not an extra level of sensitivity and motivation and willingness to reach further for those people of color that may be new, to like give them that extra help, give them that extra level of support, give them that extra attention if there seems to be like an issue with them showing up to their shifts or whatever it may be, if there's a conflict between crew members. And often that kind of thing leads to really high turnover of people of color, at least in my crew.
Definitely. Do other panelists want to chime in?
I think this is one of the reasons why I think it's going to be important to have some staff whose primary role at the fair is focusing on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to make places more welcoming, how to work with various crews, looking at your crew processes, what are the support systems in place. You know, the way that people come to the fair now and get involved, it's like who you know, and if it's just white people, they you know, unfortunately a lot of white people only know other white people. So it's going to be a challenge to change the ways that we recruit people, change the get people on crews, get people to be crafters, and change the ways that people are supported. We just need to put some new systems in place. And I don't see us being able to do that and with the focus and intensity that we need to do it without paid staff.
Totally. Iana, you wanted to say something here as well, right?
Yeah, I was just going to answer the question that was put in the chat around that issue of, and people kind of definitely see it as an issue of nepotism to some degree, in that, you know, if you, like John was saying, you have to know who you know in order to get in. And there's this dynamic of nighttime versus daytime. And in some ways that's really important, because the people that do work, you know, the entire time, they set up their booths and their spaces, and we are open for the public so that everybody can enjoy, and we can make it broader without a heavy impact on the land, which is, many participants that come during the day don't realize that that is a big reason why we don't let everyone spend the night, is because this is incredible land, and there's a huge effort put into leaving it as it was before we got there, and in making sure we don't overly impact the land in a negative way. So in that level, it is important to have some people that just come in for the day, or just come in on a smaller level of participation. And at the same time, there is this kind of awkward energy of getting kicked out for the sweep. We love you, you're still family, but you have to go home. And what's going on at night? They say the night's the best. That's the, you know, there's a lot of lore around that. And the night is awesome, it's great, you know, and the day is awesome, it's great. And it really depends on your preference. Some people would rather go home and take a shower by themselves and sleep in their bed. You know, many of us that are going overnight, actually, you know, we get worse sleep. You know, we don't get to clean ourselves well. We're eating weird food. It's a labor of love, and it's amazing, but it's hard. And we also should be able to celebrate with ourselves and with the staff members, and kind of have our own micro shows and little things going on to help us have that energy to keep going for the whole weekend. However, I think the issue, like what John was saying, if we're able to create a staff position or somebody who can really think of these issues, maybe there is a way that we can get people who have never spent the night to plug in and be able to spend the night. You know, there's some crafter booths that they created that are temporary booths, so that people that maybe haven't gotten a chance to have a booth can kind of cycle through, and that way we can hopefully access, you know, more crafters. And the same may be able to happen with overnight. However, also to echo what Britania was saying, I have brought many people of color in on my crew, and known people that have, who maybe didn't actually feel as comfortable as they ought to be, because it is an incredibly white space, or maybe because they weren't comfortable with camping, or various reasons that we weren't able to make it as welcoming as we would like to. So sometimes, you know, people come and spend the night and realize that's not even what they want anyway. So there's a massive dichotomy of that, and there is somewhat of a separation of that energy, but bottom line, everybody is fair family. If you just come for the day, or if you've been coming your whole life, or you only spent the night once, it's all fair family. And there's just different levels that we can participate. There's plenty of people that spend the night that don't participate all year round in any committees or anything like that, you know, and there's many levels that we can participate. So we definitely have to respect everybody for whatever level they're at, and it's all family.
Totally, definitely. I want to skip around a little because we're not running short on time, but we are running through time. And I want to make sure we get to the question about transphobia, because we've been talking a lot about racial and ethnic diversity. And I think it's also important that we touch on that. So Brooks, this question I'm going to direct to you. How has transphobia shown up at the fair, and what can we do to be a safer space for the trans and non-binary communities?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I'm a queer person, a parent of a trans child, and my child came out as trans at the fair and is transitioning now. And so I have a little bit of, tangential lived experience as it relates to these questions. And, there's a lot of places transphobia shows up, and the most consistent and obvious is in misgendering or using improper pronouns. And it's especially for an older generation, it can be hard to wrap your mind around a little bit. Someone you've known your whole life and you've used certain pronouns, and now you're expected to change and rewrite your neural pathways and start using different pronouns. And it can be hard, and you can also go through that own transition within your own mind without causing harm. And the easiest way to do that is just to realize when you've slipped up and apologize and use the correct pronoun. Or if you don't even realize it and you're corrected, not take personal offense to that. It's not about you as the person using the pronoun, it's about the person and their own identity. So, I made plenty of mistakes with my kid around pronouns, and it wasn't coming from a place of maliciousness. And there are times at fair, and I know of specific instances where it has been used as a malicious intent, and pronouns have been weaponized to dehumanize someone, and that's never acceptable. And something Britania was saying earlier, and Iana, about that question about what to do with people who aren't there yet, that it's really important for those around who see this happening to step in and step up and take the reins and take the focus off of the person who's being harmed. And the bystanders need to intervene to stop that harm from happening. So if you observe someone misgendering someone deliberately, or we're just saying, well, you'll always be a little girl to me, or something like that, the bystanders need to step up and say, hey, that's not cool. That's not what we do here. That's not fair. That's not a fair way to act. And so that's one way allies can really help and have a presence. But there are a lot of other subtle ways that transphobia shows up. So the Ritz is one place, right? It's a place where we're all naked together, and maybe you're seeing a body a type you have not seen before, and it's not the genitals you expect, and so people stare and they objectify people, and they just ogle and make weird faces, or you can hear people snickering or those sorts of things. That's terrible. So please don't treat people like that. It's not trans people aren't your tourist attraction or your consumable good. I mean, it's human beings we're talking about. And so we need to treat people with respect. And, I've heard of people coming up to trans people and saying, hey, can I have my photo with you? You're the first trans person I've ever seen. Again, do not do that. I mean, this is not a costume someone is wearing. And I can think of, there's a big, one thing to do at fair is to put on a dress or to cross dress for the day. I work in Rainbow Village, and we were encouraged to participate with a group that was their way of supporting trans people, was to encourage people to cross dress. And that's problematic because it's treating trans identity as if it's a costume or something that people are trying on for a day, and then they're going to go back and they're going to take their dress off and they'll be back to their real self. And this is really deep identity work that we should all be doing. We should all be thinking about gender and our gender and what we were assigned and how we're behaving, and the privileges we get from that, and the internal work we don't do because we never questioned it. I mean, everyone should think about gender. Everyone should think about sexuality in their life. You're not it's kind of hard to self-actualize if you're not introspecting in those ways. And so not seeing trans identity as a costume or as something that people are acting out, or it's not something that they're lying to you about or they're making up. It's a internal real thing that's going on, that just because maybe you don't understand doesn't mean it's not real. And a final way I would kind of say is using trans people as, you know, your personal encyclopedia to 30 questions. And I've never met a trans person. Well, tell me about this. And what did you do? And how was your surgery? And yada, you know, it's just, those are very, very personal questions that you should not, you know, you have Google, you can go Google. It's not, you know, you Google what the temperature is outside. Why don't we Google what about trans identities and do some research on our own and not expect, you know, and that goes for Black and brown people too, but not expect, you know, we're not here for your consumption. We're not here for your personal edification or your personal education. Like, educate yourself. And there's a great resource, GLAAD, GLAAD.org, tremendous resource for allies and for people who are interested in learning more. And you know, there is a workshop tomorrow on how to be a better ally to the trans community at FAIR specifically, and that will be happening at 1:30 tomorrow on this stream. So I would encourage you all to come back for that. And we'll be hearing from Transponder, which is the state's largest trans rights organization.
Thank you so much, Brooks. And I'm going to push us ahead because there are two other topics I want to make sure we get to. I want to talk about hip hop and I want to talk about cultural appropriation. So, and we only have a few minutes left, but Iana,
we have until 2:15, Sam.
Oh, good. So we have more than
Yes.
a few minutes. That's great. We have time for both of those things. But Iana, I want to direct the next question to you, and I picked you for this one because of your work with Inspire and hip hop and youth at the fair. So talking a bit about entertainment, how does the country fair's historical aversion to and exclusion of hip hop negatively affect our goal of being welcoming and inclusive?
Well, it's kind of another one of those battleground subjects that definitely I do think has a lot of kind of generational differences and cultural differences at its roots, even though the elders were around when hip hop, you know, was created and started back in the day in New York. It was very much an intersectional culture birthing itself out of not only kind of like mambo and the Latin community in the Bronx, but also creating the breakbeat, you know, and the roots in the African-American community. But there was, you know, white folks were there too, Jewish folks were there too. So it is very much at its roots an intersectional kind of culture. So the fact that the fair hasn't fully embraced it, I do think is mainly a cultural issue and that kind of generational difference to some degree of not identifying with it. I know that history-wise, our first hip hop artist to play the main stage was Radioactive, and I'm not sure the exact year. I want to say 2006 or 7, but it was in the 2000s. And that was the first actual, you know, headlined hip hop act. And we didn't really see much beyond that for many years to come in the main venues. And when you look at fair and you look at the entertainment, you have a few larger stages that have, that are considered larger based upon their sound system, their size, and the capacity of their crowd, right? So you're looking at kind of Horse Corral, you're looking at main stage, and then all of the other ones are kind of more on a similar level of their crowd space and their technology, meaning their sound system and everything. So what I've noticed in my little bit of hip hop empowering at fair that I've been attempting to do has been, it has taken the few individuals that want to see it happen to make it happen. And that's where, not to play the blame game, but people in positions of power do have to prioritize to make that kind of change. For what Inspire was able to create, that literally came out of one person at fair, essentially, Robert Despain, who started the spoken word program, went out of his way to find people outside of his culture to be represented at fair. That's why he got me, he got a couple other spoken word artists to basically do open mics. That open mic led to seeing the need and the desire for people in the crowd to get on stage, which then that's kind of what birthed the concept behind Inspire, which we perform a fully spontaneous set where we do bring in musicians, professional musicians, but we create a venue where anybody in the crowd can come up. So the random kid that wants to rap or the random old lady who wants to dance, whatever, whoever it is can have a little bit of participation. And that is very much what hip hop's about. That's the spirit behind that is coming out of the cipher, which the hip hop cipher is cipher. The technical definition is a circle, but the hip hop cipher is when people come together, often in a circle, and somebody kicks a beat and somebody raps and everybody is participating, even if you're just nodding your head or if you're adding the, or if you're rapping, whatever it is, it's that community collaboration in the moment, freestyling, all of that. You get the B-boys, B-girls coming out dancing, and it creates this vibe in the moment, live and spontaneous. We've been doing that stage for about 15 years and have gotten many complaints, more positive, but we've had a couple booths that complained, and because of those 2 to 3, maybe one year it was 4 booths that complained about our sound, we were able to boil it down to them literally admitting that it was because of the kind of music we were playing, it was because of the heavy bass, and it was because of that hip hop. And because of that, we had to change our whole reality. We changed when we do our performances, how long we do it, how loud we do it, whether or not we're able to have, you know, nighttime or daytime and different things. And we've altered ourselves, even though, in my opinion, we're offering a service to the community and should be ushered in and empowered. We've had to change ourselves in order to fit into the status quo. When I mentioned that there's a bit of the controversy comes mainly because the fair was at one point a fully acoustic event where that was mainly bluegrass, that was mainly kind of folk singers, guitar singer, songwriter stuff. And so to go from a fully acoustic event to all of a sudden getting more and more power at more and more stages, and the younger generation, which, I mean, we're kind of old now, so like even the younger generation and our kids at this point, having more of an affinity for electronic music as well as hip hop. That EDM and hip hop has not been fully embraced. It's often, okay, let's find you a corner, you know, in the parking lot to do that, or let's find you a little niche here or there. So it hasn't been something at a whole that the fair has been able to embrace. Hip hop signifies a counterculture that is beginning to be respected and embraced by fair, and I do want to acknowledge that. But this process has been super slow. And that's where we kind of have to recognize what's the biggest issue here is, are we going to continue to grow from there because we're not really doing that outreach and we're maybe not fully supporting those artists that are bringing that vibe and they are actually embodying the multicultural facets of hip hop and of other, you know, electronic dance music, same thing. So how do we basically outreach and embrace those microcultures so that our youth can feel respected and our marginalized communities can feel respected and really be present and create a voice at fair? So the more, again, it comes down to people trying. Robert Despain picked us out. He gave us everything he could give us. He said, yes, keep going. Even if you get complaints, we're going to find ways that you can still keep doing what you're doing. And the more managers, coordinators, entertainment people that keep doing that and create actual lasting, concrete passes and stage space at fair, the better. At this point, we've been semi-failing. I mean, we were told we could be involved in the new loop when the new loop happened, because the work that Inspire was doing wasn't just performance, but was also very much this intergenerational collaborative, a way to kind of bridge that gap between the old white hippies and their kids and their kids' kids, or this younger generation. And how do we blend and have it quiet so people can sleep or have their acoustic, but also have a space for this? That new loop moved forward without involving us at all. And even at a point we were told we would have a stage there, a space there. It was going to be the space, we wanted to call it Upstage, I believe. It was going to be for a youth kind of led stage, kind of like the youth stage, but more intergenerational and really prioritizing those marginalized communities and the unheard from cultures of music like hip hop, et cetera, that are present at fair, but aren't necessarily fully respected. So that the reason we weren't involved, I think it literally probably is just losing sight, falling through the cracks, which feels like crap because people don't prioritize making sure that those voices are heard. And it's all, I think, well-intended in creating these awesome spaces. And it is a super multicultural space. However, without that follow through and really empowering people that are doing the work, we are falling short. and you see amazing people from multicultural. They used to be the pan fluters that were from Peru. They stopped coming 20 years ago, I feel like, because they couldn't get a pass. You know, you've got these amazing African back flippers like Facenet and his whole crew. Half of them couldn't get passes. They're doing flips over 80 people, you know, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. It's just not consistent. And so these are the things that we strive to work for. And I feel like the bottom line respect for these different musics and less of this electronic versus acoustic fight. That's what needs to happen. And so that we can find space for both and find ways that people can get all of their needs met and still we can respect and embody something awesome, because hip hop's great and everybody should love it. Even if you don't love all of it, there's a piece of it for everyone.
And I want you to know that I do love it, just so you know, hip hop. So I want to, and I apologize to the panelists. I had sent around list of questions and named the people I wanted to ask. I'm going to switch it around a little bit just to try to keep the voices a little more even. So what I'd like to do is ask the cultural appropriation question and direct it to you, Britania, if that's okay. How can cultural appropriation at the country fair be harmful to BIPOC people who are in attendance? What is this concept and how does it hurt folks?
Yeah, this is a great example of ways that we are not creating a safer space, and something that would actually be pretty easy to get rid of to make the people of color here that are already here feel safer, more seen, more respected, and make a good impression on any people of color that may walk through our doors, through our gates. I mean, I think the biggest piece of cultural appropriation that I've noticed at FAIR is Indigenous, North American Indigenous cultural appropriation. I know there are quite a few booths, well, maybe not quite a few, but I have seen booths that have like North American Native inspired type crafts, and one major booth that's just covered in Native American inspired. I wish I could think of the nation. Can you guys help me out? What's the name of the nation that?
I think Haida and Tlingit.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Haida inspired, and what was the other one?
Tlingit.
Yeah, Tlingit, and I think that I'm saying that right, but I might not be.
Inspired art. There were adoptions in my past that made it such that my Indigenous ancestry is erased in my family line. So I can only imagine what it must be like for an Indigenous person who has strong cultural ties to their Indigenous nation, and how hurtful that must be to see non-Native folks using that imagery to make money, to maybe look like woke or cool or artsy, when Indigenous people are one of the most socially disadvantaged in our country.
I think it's really, I'm noticing that there's some interesting overlap between what you're saying and what Brooks was saying earlier about sort of gender as performance and like culture as performance. And the country fair is a place where there's an awful lot of spectacle, and things are made into spectacle on purpose, right? It's part of what we do really well. But then I think when we thoughtlessly take something that's really core to a person's identity and turn it into spectacle in that way, whether it's culture or whether it's gender, and making the performance of gender into spectacle or making the performance of culture into spectacle, it can be really harmful because it can not take seriously things that are pretty deep. But also, just what do you all think about how we can approach that that sort of balance, I guess, between not losing the spectacle that we do really well, but also making sure that we're not treading on these really sensitive points for folks?
You know, when the board grappled with the story pole as cultural appropriation, the guidelines were amended at that same time to actually have cultural appropriation mentioned in the guidelines. But the way the guidelines deal with it is, think about what you're doing, and if someone comes up to you and says this offends them, well, maybe you should think about doing something different, which puts all the power in the hands of the people doing the appropriating the culture. And I think as an organization, we have a conversation that started with the story poll that is not at all finished. And we have a lot to talk about here. And I think to have it be this wishy-washy thing in the guidelines is not going to change anything. So how to move forward? Well, one of the things for sure is to involve Indigenous folks in the processes by which, you know, crafts are reviewed. But also there's the individuals doing appropriating, and then there's us as an organization doing appropriating. And I don't think we recognize how we as an organization appropriates culture. I know that many people think that the opening ceremony is sacrosanct, but to me, that's all examples of how we're appropriating culture. And I think we have to be real, yeah, it's not going to be an easy thing, because it's the people who say, well, this is artistic freedom versus cultural appropriation. And I think you can deal with cultural appropriation and still have artistic freedom. I don't think the two are, you know, those two goals are incompatible at all. But it's going to take us some work to do. And it's going to take moving beyond just simply saying, think about what you're doing. It's going to take some real, we would not, for instance, let a crafter sell something with swastikas on it. You know, so clearly we can, I think most people will agree that there is at some point there's a limit, and it's moving that to be more inclusive, I think it's going to be a real challenge. I wish I had an easy answer on it, but I think it's time that we need to continue that conversation and have something more around this.
Can I draw in a theme from the last panel, the workshop that Robin put on? So near the end of that panel, I only came in at the middle because I'm coming in from work. But near the end of that panel, there was some talk about whiteness and the sort of sense of whiteness as being a tight or a controlled thing, as this sense of sort of white culture as being a really rigid, kind of difficult to get around thing. And I think that if we're thinking about that, right, it makes sense that a group of white people who are trying to find a spirituality that doesn't have that tightness in it is going to look to cultures that maybe have a looser spirituality, or that maybe have an approach to culture or to being in the world that is, Britania, thinking about the theme that you brought in, perhaps closer to the speed of relationship, right? And yet, obviously, it's not, except you can't just grab somebody else's culture and like run with it. That's not the way that these things work. But I think maybe finding a place where we understand what's driving this, and then can have the conversation from that space of understanding of like, I get why. But again, what do you all think about? You know, I'm supposed to be leading this panel, not answering the question. So what do you all think about that? just jump in if you want.
Great point. To look at that trauma story, that white trauma story of not having culture, not having those tight cultural bonds, and also of just being so used to taking, being so used to colonizing, not even in realizing that you're taking in many cases. And I mean, I think there are a lot of teachers who talk about this better than I can. And unfortunately, I don't have any names off the top of my head, but I would just recommend people just do some research on Native folks who talk about ways to appreciate culture, in particular, how to appreciate Native culture, for example, because that's often the argument that people who are culturally appropriating are making, like, I'm appreciating the culture. And yeah, there's a lot of great information out there on how to actually do it. Some things coming to mind off the top of my head are, paying people or organizations to receive education or guidance or learning. For example, like there's a Kumeyaay community college here in San Diego, and like learning the Kumeyaay, like taking time to learn the Kumeyaay language, and staying away from like using Indigenous people as a monolith and asking, is this okay if I do this? Or that goes for any marginalized group. But yeah, we're not monoliths. There's gonna be multiple sides to any particular question. So it's not so much about being a good white person, like doing the thing that will not get you in trouble, but doing the thing that seems to be the least harmful and most supportive overall from what you're able to learn from people from that particular group.
When I think we do something, we have something at the fair in vaudeville, right? Vaudeville's not appropriating anything. And, it's a French origin. It's, it's a, core pillar of, the experience of the fair. And so it's not tearing down everything. I think when it comes to Indigenous, especially North American Indigenous specifically, I mean, the reason that's so traumatic is because we're literally on the land that's stolen. I mean, it's not, you bring up Indigenous and someone else says yurt, and it's like, last I checked, the fair wasn't happening in Mongolia. And so, I don't think there's a group of Mongolians that are upset that we have yurts that I've heard about. And so I think we need to be really, really conscious of our place and our positioning and the reason that specifically and is so traumatic for folks, because there was a potlatch that went on in this very place for 10,000 years that we've had 50 years, but there was 10,000 plus years where a potlatch happened, where the coastal tribes came over, and there'll be an OCF land piece later this weekend too, and met the Kalapuya and exchanged goods and had a big festival and feasted and traded and sold handcraft goods and had music. And that needs to be understood and honored. And there's ways, I don't disagree, but I have a slightly different perspective on inclusion in that, we are, I think, in many ways, a safer place than the world at large. And the only way we're going to work through these issues is when we get representation and people in power who are experts in these areas and who can provide that insight to help us. And so I think, even going back to us being exclusionary from the comment from earlier, I think we can move to a place of conscious inclusion where we're not just bringing in the friend of the friend anymore. We're as an organization, as crews, as individuals, consciously thinking about who do we want to bring in, and not so much as like, how's my party going to be better, but how are we going to be better as people and as an organization, and be more aware and continue raising our consciousness, because it's a process that doesn't stop and it doesn't end.
Well, I think that brings us about to our time. Or do we need to wrap up? I saw Iana wanting to add a word on this one, so.
Yeah, please, Iana, go ahead.
I was just going to speak on, you know, the hippie counterculture is born of other cultures. It's somewhat appropriative just in its own essence. You know, hip from the jazz scene, long hair from indigenous cultures. And that is where we grapple with the cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. And like many things in these arenas, it's mainly about consent. So it's appropriation if you don't have any contact with that culture that you're taking from. It's appreciation if, for whatever reasons or whatever your story is, you've connected with that culture and someone from that culture has offered this teaching to you or taught you this craft or whatever it is. There's different levels, and that often comes from consent and it comes from respect. And to echo what Brooks said, when we're on stolen land and we choose of our own accord to create art and spaces that are from a culture that's not our own, then we have to be really careful, since there is such little representation from those cultures at this event. So is it embracing or is it stealing? And I personally feel we will never grapple with what cultural appropriation is at our fair until we have reparations and respect to those indigenous cultures, even if they aren't, you know, fully around in many ways anymore. But if we don't try with every fiber of our being as an organization to give respect to the indigenous land that we are occupying, when, like Brooks said, 10,000 years is a lot more than 50. So we haven't really been trying good enough. Putting up, you know, those pictures at the sauna and the story pole isn't the same thing as fully, you know, embracing other cultures and doing outreach to make sure that they are represented and are coming to the table, so that if we are using their art, they're bringing that and teaching it rather than us taking it and assuming we know what it is we're representing. So reparations is the way, and probably the answer to everything, really.
Yeah. I do want to throw in that the Ritz folks, after the conversation about the story poll that the organization had, have really made an effort to bring in folks from Tlingit and Haida culture and artists from that culture to try and bridge that, so that it's not just an appropriative or not just an exploitative thing that's happening with the art at the sauna. And so I think it's important that we say that before we get done. I'm not saying I don't know 100% of the details, but I do know that some of that work is ongoing, and I think giving some credit on that is important.
Thanks for adding that in, Sam. And I think just the most important part there is like how much power is being given to the Haida in directing that. How much benefit are they receiving versus how much benefit is the Ritz receiving is key to know as we learn more details about that. But I'm glad you brought that in.
Okay. I think that brings us to our time for this panel. And the next panel up, it looks like, is the consent, sexual violence prevention, and gender inclusion at the fair. Am I correct about that?
You are correct. From a local in Eugene nonprofit here, Respect Ed, works with high school students and youth around the region to educate on consent. Yeah.
Sam, before we leave this completely, I just say if anybody wants to communicate with the diversity committee, they can email diversity@OregonCountryFair.org and it will come to the committee.
Thank you for adding that, John. That's important.